Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes, filling in for the great Dan Proft. You can hear Dan and Amy Jacobson on Chicago's Morning Answer every weekday from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Joining me this week on Illinois Rising is Kathleen Murphy. Kathleen is the Director of Communications for the Illinois Opportunity Project. Kathleen, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
What people don't realize is that Kathleen is one of the basket of people in the basket of deplorables. She is a talented, smart, single mom. She should be the thing that feminist left loves more than anything, but do they love you more than anything?
No, they hate me more than anything because I'm a conservative.
Why do you think that is?
Pro-life conservative. They don't like that.
Speaking of the left and how crazy they can be in addition to not liking you, because how could they not like you, AFSCME. Let's talk about AFSCME. So the governor and AFSCME have been in a battle for a long, long time over this contract. Can you tell the listeners a little bit, like, what is AFSCME looking for in their new contract?
Right.
Which to me seems like it's completely outrageous, particularly in the economic environment we're in. And what is the governor telling them in response?
I mean, their demands are about 2 sandwiches shy of a picnic. Honestly, they want 29% wage increases. They want to work 37.5 hours a week. After that, it counts towards overtime, the benefits, 5-week vacation.
Right, and they want the taxpayers who aren't getting anything near that in their everyday lives, right? The average people that go to work every day. I don't mean average in a bad way.
Unheard of in the
correct, and they want that to be there for them, but want the taxpayer who doesn't have anywhere near those types of working conditions, those types of salaries, those types of benefits to pay for it. And now they're saying, this is the big thing now, they're saying if they don't get what they want, they might strike. In fact, they're authorizing a strike vote in February to decide whether or not they should go on strike. That we're at this last bastion of negotiation where it can't go. We're gonna strike. So joining us now to talk about this very issue is Miley Smith. Miley is a labor attorney with the Illinois Policy Institute, who's going to break down a little bit of this AFSCME strike and sort of what this means for the negotiations with the governor and going forward. Miley, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So educate the listeners on what's going on sort of procedurally. So the AFSCME has decided to take a strike vote. What does that mean? And then what does it mean after they take the vote?
Sure. Well, a strike vote does not mean that a strike will happen immediately. Like you mentioned, this is an authorization vote. So what that means is that, if they vote to authorize a strike, that means the majority who voted authorized AFSCME leadership to call a strike should they decide that that's necessary. So if the majority of those who vote say, yes, we want to strike, or yes, we're willing to strike, then that gives AFSCME leadership the authority to call a strike, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily will do so.
Miley, do you have any indication of how the vote might go?
Well, that's interesting. There are a number of people who cannot vote, and that definitely, tilts the scale on the way it might go. If fair share members, those who are not actually members of AFSCME, they can't vote. Those people who have said, I don't want to be a part of this union, they're the ones who are most likely wanting to work. They can't vote. Typically what we see is if someone doesn't want to buck the union, maybe they just don't vote at all. So typically those people that vote are going to be those that are going to vote in favor of a strike. Yeah,
and so, Miley, sort of like from a policy and political perspective, strikes, typically for schools, they go over okay, right? Because people are very concerned about their kids not being in school, right? So that gives teachers unions like CTU and other feckless unions the opportunity to threaten a strike or to actually strike and put real pressure on families and parents who want their kids to be educated. But AFSCME is not similarly situated. They don't have that kind of pressure that they can put on the populace. How do you think an actual strike would go, and how should Rauner respond?
Sure. Well, first, let's just talk about public safety. Under Illinois law, safety workers, so your security employees or peace officers, they cannot strike. So if you have prison workers who are in charge of inmates, they cannot strike. And there's also a clause in the Illinois law that says if there is a clear and present danger posed by a strike, the state can go to a court and the court can end the strike. So public safety is taken care of. The governor's office has also said that the state is going to call on whatever resources that it needs, private vendors, other states, local governments, to do what it needs to continue operations. And I know that the state has already said that because AFSCME has had these continual, since last summer we've heard that AFSCME leadership is considering a strike. And so the state has already had what they have called extensive conversations with outside resources that can step in. So the state's doing what it can. So public safety is not an issue, and the state is doing what it can to make sure operations continue.
Hey, Miley, as you're talking, it really seems to me that this kind of just defines the political culture in Illinois, right? You have this very large, powerful public sector union who spends a lot of money to keep legislators in power, who keep them large and powerful. That's the culture in Illinois. And in order to move away from the culture, it seems like the governor has to really dig in his heels here and stand his ground. And maybe that means replacing striking workers with non-union labor in order to have that culture shift. Is there anything that would legally prevent him from replacing striking workers with non-union labor?
There is not. He can replace striking workers. Now, if the labor board were to determine that this strike is unlawful, he could actually fire workers who are striking. And even if this strike is lawful, even if AFSCME has a right to go forward with this strike, the governor can replace these workers, and they may not have a job to come back to, because under Illinois law, those striking workers can come back only if there's a place for them. And if those positions have been filled with other workers and there's no vacancy, then they're out of a job.
She is Miley Smith from the Illinois Policy Institute. She's a labor attorney, obviously a very good one. Miley, thank you so much for your insights on this issue, and thank you for joining us today.
Great, thanks a lot.
Kathleen, so what Miley is talking about, and sort of what you raised in your question, is, do we have a 1981 air traffic controllers issue? I mean, in other words, you've got AFSCME, who is clearly on the side of AFSCME. Sure. You've got Democrats who are on the side of AFSCME because AFSCME finances their campaigns and their largesse in Springfield. And you've got Governor Rauner, who has to make a decision. Whose side is he going to be on? And it seems to me, and Dan and I talk about this quite a bit, and I hear Dan talk about this on his show quite often, it seems to me that this is an easy call for the governor, right? Why doesn't he say, look, these folks at AFSCME are the problem. Mm-hmm. This is a great indicator of the problem. If they don't get everything they want in a declining economic state, where they want, like you said, 37.5-hour work weeks and a 29% raise and all their pensions protected and everything else, and they don't care what happens to the people. The people, there's way more people than there are AFSCME members, right? The people should rise up, and he should take the side of the people. And if that means letting them strike, let them strike. If that means, per Miley's conversation, that he can fire them, then fire them. It's time for him to stand on the side of principle and stand on the side of the people. And I think this could be a real electoral issue for him that could help reset the conversation and drive voters that maybe aren't looking positively at him to look more positively at him.
I agree. I mean, what better way to demonstrate that you will not equivocate and to demonstrate strength than to stand your ground on this issue? This is not, nobody wants to fire anybody. It's not an easy decision. He's saying, I'm willing to take the heat because my opinion about the culture in this state is right, and I'm ready to move us away from it.
Right, and it's about the messaging too, right? So, right, like nobody wants to fire someone unless that person is asking for things that are ridiculous, forcing you to pay for them, and throwing a temper tantrum when they don't get their way. I think if it's presented correctly, if the emotion is tied to you working every day to pay their salary, not to pay for your kids' food and your kids' gas and your kids' milk. If it's shown that they're a bunch of children, which they are, who aren't getting their way, then he can really win this argument. And the fact that these people are getting fired, so be it.
Right. And well, when you demonstrate on the private sector side, that's exactly what would happen if you didn't, if you persisted with these outrageous demands that were costly to the company that you're working for, and then we're going to walk off because you didn't get them, you'd be fired.
Well, and I think that people fundamentally understand that, right? Because the vast majority of folks that work in the state, they don't work for government. They work for a small business, or maybe they work for a medium-sized business, and they recognize that if they don't perform, if they don't go to work, if they make unreasonable demands that the company can't provide or because it wouldn't be able to sustain it and stay in business, they know what would happen to them. And they feel that that's a fair trade. They don't think, because they're fair-minded people, the people of the state are fair-minded people, that if they don't get everything they want every day in life, that they should be able to get that. And I think that there is an argument that the governor can and should make to allow that to happen. And if he makes that argument and stands with it through 2017, if he has to fire those people and replace those people, when 2018 comes around, regardless of who the Democratic nominee is, he is going to have something to stand and to say, I stood on the sidelines and in the huddle with you and not with the unions and the status quo.